Good evening, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a nice month, everyone, and God bless you. Thank you for always watching and subscribing to the channel. Alright, let's get into the news. And we've been covering the ongoings in Brazil lately. Over the last couple of weeks, we know what happened in their election kind of resembles what happened in Arizona and, of course, what happened in 2020. Here at home, however, they have a thing in their constitution that allows the military to intervene if irregularities show up in their election. That's what's been taking place, and now with the reveal of a bombshell here or yesterday, from Elon Musk, saying that Twitter may have indeed interfered in Brazil's election. It looks like the military might now be deciding to go ahead and declare martial law in order to go ahead and restore that republic back. The weight needs to be restored and not allow the communist dictator to take over. So let's go and take a look what we have here. Can we do it from the Gateway Pundit, who has been doing an excellent job of keeping up with what's happening over in Brazil and their election. It says go time military deployed in Brazil, martial law coming next week. Military vehicles have been spotted mobilizing in Brazil, as President Bolsonaro met with military leaders at a ceremony to promote new generals in Brasilia to Thursday. Martial law is coming next week's as Brazil Observer. Matt. Time Med Elon must go to Twitter may have had interfered in Britain in Brazilian elections. I have sources on the ground saying that the reservists are being activated right now starting yesterday in a smaller and mid-sized cities. Journalist Matthew Time Ed Tulsi Bannon on December 2nd, you can already see videos of tanks being transported to strategic points and chokeholds around the country. I think by next Wednesday or Thursday, the generals are going to put a letter in front of Bolsonaro and say sign this and activate us. We believe we have to act right now, according to the Constitution, and go after these voting machine, arrestees, judges, and then the house of cards would fall. More and more videos seem to be showing heavy armor Hurwitz APCs deployed throughout Brazil. Millions of Brazilians have been calling for the army to intervene. According to Article 142 of the Brazilian Constitution, to stop communists can convicted criminal, Luiz Lula da Silva, from becoming president with the backing of the drug cartels to CCP and, of course, Joe Biden. There are unconfirmed reports of armed forces being deployed in cities all across Brazil. More images have been available on Getor. Those images, while most videos show heavy armor being piggybacked, some show fully crewed and combat-ready APCs. We see that down here on things. If military really deploys to stop the election by the convicted criminal Lula da Silva, they will certainly have the backing of Brazilian people. No Lula sympathizers have been seen for months, or even since millions of Brazilians started protesting after the October 30th all-digital election. 3 separate reports have found that the elections could not be verified since many of the voting machines could not be audited. The military audit required by law could not be completed because the pro-Lula Electoral Court refuses to turn over the source code for the machines. Lula da Silva is a convicted criminal who spent 2 years in jail for corruption and mash counter carwash scandal before his own Supreme Court nominee vacated the charges to allow him to run as if to spite the Brazilian people to Supreme Court. And yesterday also they vacated corruption charges against Lula's crony, André Vargas, also in prison for 3 years in a carwash affair, to allow him to join the communist coup. Indigenous tries. Men are protesting for democracy against election. Fraud occupied the airport in Brasilia. Cultural imperialist mainstream media are ignoring the indigenous pleas for sovereignty and showing their true racism. So yeah, we were going to have a whole lot. This was a tweet here by Elon Musk responding to Avi. Can you find out what other elections were handled by the former Twitter regime? Thank you. And the rest of the world. Elon says, I've seen a lot of concerning tweets about the recent Brazil election. If those tweets are accurate, it's possible that Twitter personnel gave preference to left-wing candidates. And then some significant news. Absolute spineless cowards. You can't keep going on about my human rights, but diversity, equity, MMA, compassion, anti-fascism. I mean, the list goes on and on. We've all heard the leftist spiel, all the woke stances and woke virtue signaling. But you can't publicly take those stances if you're going to be selective about where you choose to actually take a stand. How utterly pathetic is this Brandon regime? I mean, at this point, you think LeBron James is in charge of their foreign policy? I mean, We call the denui that the corporate left-wing press and of course the Brandon regime wouldn't have the guts that they were such cowards and such clearly compromised shills that they would be too fearful to say or do anything against the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP's human rights atrocities. And yep, here it is John Kirby, a high-level Biden official, essentially telling us what we already knew. But even though it's not exactly surprising, it's still just shocking and a far cry from what we grew accustomed to under the Trump years. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean, as we continue on with this 2-year-long segment of the Brandon regime as absolutely despicable. Alright, folks. So I present to you, John Kirby, NCS Coordinator for Strategic Communications. Everyone listen to this, they said. You know, this is an interesting situation that has developed with Apple, and I want to start there and get your take on what Apple is doing because they have restricted, which is what the Chinese government wants, some use of AirDrop ability from iPhone to iPhone, because they're cutting the service down. And this is the way the protesters are communicating with each other. What does the White House, what do you say to Apple, about helping the Chinese government to keep their people under control? We look in general, and we've been clear about this all around the world, we want the individual citizens, no matter what government they live under, be able to communicate freely and openly, transparently and reliably. And we've made that clear with respect to Iran. And we certainly continue to make that clear here. With respect to Apple, Apple's a private company, Martha, they have to make decisions, and they have to speak for those decisions. But here at the White House, here in the administration, we want to see that individual citizens, whether they're protesting or not, but in this case, I know that the context we're talking about, are able to communicate freely and openly. But why not say something to Apple? Because we were just told the other day that the White House is keeping an eye on Elon Musk and Twitter. So why would you say that from the podium? You didn't say it, but Queenstown Pierre said it, and not call Apple out for helping the Chinese government to suppress their own people's ability to communicate? Again, I think we've been very clear and consistent on this. Certainly publicly, we've been very open about our desires to be able to see citizens communicate. And you know, Apple, if this is a decision that they're making, then they should have to speak to that. But we're not, we can't, and we aren't in the business of telling private companies how to execute their initiative, that Twitter's company too. So why is Twitter getting one treatment? Well, those are completely two different circumstances. You're talking about the potential, while you're talking about the potential for perhaps foreign investment and involvement in the management of Twitter. That's a different issue than what we're talking about here, which is a business decision by Apple with respect to how one of their applications is being used by a foreign government, and that government is China and Apple's policies, and they've changed policies specifically for China when it comes to what they put on their phones. Okay, folks, there you have it. You see the leftist double standard. Everything they do is subjective. They believe in free speech, but only for people and ideas that they approve. So not exactly free speech. They believe in human rights, but apparently only in Ukraine and in countries that have a lot of oil, smaller countries that they wish to infiltrate the government when it comes to China fairly. They don't care about these issues enough when it comes to holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable, or even taking a basic stance domestically, if it means they'll hurt Xi Jinping's feelings. I mean, just despicable. This is the Biden administration's response to Apple caving into the Chinese communists so they can crack down on their own citizens. You have an American company colluding with an authoritarian regime to suppress its own people. And the Biden administration is unwilling to say a thing, and they use their classic cop-out argument. I'm a private company, Apple's a private company, they can do whatever they want, of course, the utter hypocrisy because Twitter apparently can't. Here's Korean John Pierre once again representing the Biden in the administration, essentially going on the record telling us that the Brandon regime is keenly aware of what's going on with Twitter. And they're monitoring the situation because it's in the news for purposes of, quote, national security. Everyone listen to this. When you say that you're going to be monitoring some of the speech on there, if you see something that you don't like, would you try to shut Twitter down? So look, when you talk about monitoring, it is, I hate to break it to you, Peter, just like everybody else, we very much monitor the news. We pay close attention to everything that you all are reporting. And Twitter's in the news a lot. And so that's what we're paying attention to. We're paying attention to what is in the news and what is being reported on the misinformation that's out there. Another double standard now, isn't it? The whole private company argument is somehow valid for Apple but isn't valid for Twitter. Oh, but Twitter's in the news. And Apple isn't. The CCP's crackdown on its citizens must not have hit their radar. Give me a break, not to mention talking about Apple being in the news, a company that routinely abuses its monopoly power kicking conservative apps off of their App Store. That's not a problem. But free speech on Twitter is. I cannot stand these people. I mean, it's just unreal. And actually, speaking of double standards, and the whole national security risk thing, somehow Twitter, or I guess, misinformation on Twitter, I'm not exactly sure what their stance is here. Somehow whatever's going on Twitter is a national security concern, but TikTok, everything going on there. An app that seems to be algorithmically manipulating our use, an app that is essentially working directly with the CCP to collect our data, once again, for the Chinese Communist Party to use no national security concern there. We're focused on Twitter. Very interesting, indeed, how the Democrats refused to take a strong stance against China. Could it possibly have something to do with the fact that China seems to be using TikTok to again algorithmically manipulate the platform, or individuals using the platform to the benefit of Democrats during every election cycle? Because clearly they don't want Trump back in office? Possibly, probably. There's clearly some kind of corruption here. Something stinks. I mean, it stinks to the high heavens. To me, there's no other way to explain this kind of behavior, this kind of reaction or lack thereof. The lack of reaction other than these people are clearly compromised. CCP, lobbying money and influence has become too powerful. It's the LeBron James effect. He's making too much money off the back of slave labor in China and of course in the Chinese market to take a stand is too much to lose supposedly. Well, it seems. As though the government said something to lose as well. Here's Joe Biden with Emmanuel Macron. Both pledging to support Ukraine but totally dodging the question on Chinese white paper revolution have departed. Alright. None of these leaders are willing to make a statement or take a stand in support of the Chinese people fighting for freedom. Meanwhile, these are the scenes coming out of China. Unarmed citizens being rallied into buses, people being forcibly taken out of their homes, total oppression, total tyranny, and not a single word from any of these cowardly so-called Western leaders. These are not leaders, folks, and the contrast could not be more clear. You know, this is exactly why Donald Trump was so great, because he would have said something, he would have stood up, and somehow we're supposed to believe that he's the bad guy in this whole thing. And Joe Biden is the man of character. I mean, just look at this clown. Literally, as I'm recording this video. This pops up on my Twitter feed. We clean up pretty good. President Biden or President Biden's handlers tweet a picture of Biden and Macron, embracing each other, smiling in their fancy tuxedos. Meanwhile, really the only takeaway from this whole thing, at least for me, is the continued foreign policy cowardice as these people continue to cave, unwilling to stand up against the tyrannical CCP regime. It's despicable. And it's exactly what we saw throughout the pandemic. And just think about it. They're more concerned and more worried about Elon Musk and Twitter bringing back freedom of speech and the free exchange of ideas. They're more concerned with that and shutting that down because it somehow risks national security. They're more concerned with that than they are with Apple colluding with the CCP to suppress citizens. Absolutely disgusting, but it's right on brand for the Democrats. They're more focused on shutting down free speech and disarming the American populace because they don't want to condemn the CCP. They want to be just like the CCP at least. Alright, thanks for being here, folks. Please receive a big hug from all of us. Let me know down